Hey guys, this is chess coach Andrew Rankin. Thanks for tuning in for episode 8 in the series Buffing Your Black Repertoire. Today's game was played against a chess.com rapid opponent who's rated 2100. My opponent played the Nimzo-Larsen Attack. In this video, I simply want to demonstrate a strong idea for black against any opening you find strange or any opening that makes you uncomfortable. Simply play a reverse London. Solid as a rock. So the game starts with b3. So we play a reverse London. d5, bishop b2. And I play bishop to f5. And my idea is that I want to play the move e6 before I put my knight on f6. That way he can never take and damage my pawn structure. I highly doubt he's going to take, but I don't really want to give him any options. So he continues with e3. I play e6. He plays f4. So now he's really saying, I'm going to sink a piece into f5, and I'm going to attack you on the king side. I'm going to play g4, g5, and just throw everything I have at your king side. But no problem, because we're solid as a rock. Knight f6, knight f3, bishop e7, bishop check, which is strange because I can just play the move c6. Again, usually bishops coming out here are trying to trade themselves off for the knight. So that's why I don't want to block with the knight, because if he can trade off this bishop for this knight, then I can never use this knight on d7 or on c6 to fight for control of the e5 square. Very similar to ideas against the Queen's Indian defense or the Nimzo Indian defense. So my opponent drops the bishop back to d3, and now he has these laser beam bishops, but I'm not really afraid because my knight is nice and safe, and if he takes my bishop, which I actually let him do, I play the move a6, just threatening to create sort of a nice pawn storm here on the queenside sometime in the future if he ever decides to castle queenside, which I really don't want him to do. And now he takes, and I'm really happy with this because I get this really nice f5 pawn. So it helps me grab the e4 square for a piece, and it stops his kingside attack. So he doesn't have the ability to push the move f5. He doesn't have the ability to play the move g4, and I just traded off my light square bishop, but now look at my light square pawns. They're all over the place, so I really have no light square weaknesses. And he traded off probably one of his key attacking pieces. So one piece traded off means that his attack is going to be even less strong. So he castled. I castled. He plays the move h3. Not really a fan of this move. I guess it means he's going to play the move g4 in the future, but he still has to prepare it because I control that square. And he's stopping me from playing knight to g4, but my knight doesn't want to go to g4. My knight wants to go to e4. So I just developed my knight to d7. He plays the move d3. So this is very similar to a Queen's Indian defense. You're going to see he's going to have pawns moving on all sides of the board. And these are really going to create a lot of weaknesses. It's really going to be hard for him to keep all of his pawn weaknesses in check. So I just take advantage of that by playing queen to b6. I really like that I'm tickling this weakness, but I'm also attacking the king, who is right behind that weakness. So the pawn is pinned. The pawn cannot move. So he plays the move queen to e1, and I play the move rook a to e8. This rook is potentially really strong on this file, so I'm not really sure that I want to move the rook off of the f file just in case future attacks come. But I do want to put a nice heavy piece on the e file and threaten moves like bishop to c5, which would mean this pawn falls. So he plays the move king to h2, making sure that the pawn is now capable of moving forward. And I play the move bishop to b4. So I hit the queen, and I also hit the pawn now 2 times, because when the bishop moves, it's now a discovered attack. So he plays the move c3, but I can insert rook takes e3. Now I do have to make sure that I'm comfortable losing the exchange here, because you'll see that my rook actually gets a little bit trapped because he has this really nice move. After I move my bishop back to d6, he has the knight here. So it cuts off the coordination between my queen and my rook, and he's also attacking my weak f5 pawn. So I'm going to take another pawn, and now he's going to attack it with his queen. And my rook is really trapped here, but this bishop is terrible. This knight is undeveloped, and therefore this rook is stuck in the corner. All of my pieces are ready to come into the game, and I really want to go to the center unopposed. So I think my minor pieces right now are actually much more valuable than, say, my rooks. So I'm willing to trade off this rook for one of his most active pieces. And I'm not down any material. I have 2 pawns and a knight for a rook, which is totally fine. And these knights you're going to see are going to end up dancing around the whole board because he's really created a lot of individual outposts and color weaknesses by moving his pawns and dedicating himself to this kingside attack with the move f4 and bishop to b2. It's just too committal early on. So of course we jump the knight into the center right away. This knight is definitely more valuable than this rook. So for the time being, our sacrifice is completely worth it. He goes knight to d2, and I want to be able to take back in the center with another piece. So I bring my knight on d7 to f6. And now he lashes out with the move g4. We see this time and time again when our opponents feel very uncomfortable. The fact that this bishop is terrible, it's stuck behind this pawn. I actually have pressure on this pawn. He has weaknesses all over, but he also has no way to break at my pawn structure because he has no c pawn and he has no e pawn. So the only break that he has is the g break, but like I said, this is not so good because we have this beautiful pawn on f5. So first we can take the pawn, and when he takes back, we can play knight takes knight. When the queen takes, then we take with check. My opponent plays king to g3, attacking the knight, and I move back. And now I have the simple threat of moving the knight into e4. He plays rook to the e-file, but now I am going to win back the exchange. I play knight to e4, rook takes, pawn takes. He moves to e3 with the queen, attacking my pawn, and I just put my rook behind it. My opponent plays queen to c3, and I play queen to b5. My idea is pretty simple. I want to stop this move. I guess he could play this move right now, which is a pretty nice threat. I think I'd have to play a move like f6 because he's threatening checkmate. But if he takes here, I can just play queen takes, and if queen takes, pawn takes, and we're still up 3 pawns, so this doesn't look very good for white. So that's why my opponent decided to play rook to d1. And now I get to start to attack his king. This king is very weak, and this pawn is pinned to the king, and so I can play the what looks impossible, but is totally allowed, queen to g5 check. Pawn can't take because the bishop pins the pawn to the king. King goes to h3, and now we win off another pawn. So at this point, we're up 4 pawns, and we're very happy with how the game is going. Excuse me. My opponent plays rook to d2, just preventing any checks on his king. We could go here, and here I force the queen trade with queen to f3. And he takes and I takes. But it turns out that the computer finds this really nice move, which is the rook lift. Rook to e6, and mate is actually going to be unstoppable. I missed that. I was actually just playing nice and simple chess. So when he went rook to d2, I just decided to trade the queens. He brings the rook there, and I attack his bishop. And when he moves, now I can push the pawn to f2. And he really has to get behind the pawn, and so now I can pick up a 5th pawn. And he brings the king, but I'm really happy here to trade one of my 5 extra pawns to get off a pair of the heavy pieces and then simply win this bishop endgame with 3-0. I also have a pawn majority on the queen side as well. So that's why I play rook to c2, just creating a little bit of extra threats. for example, if rook takes pawn, I'll take the bishop. So my opponent plays bishop to a5. I play the move h5, just trying to get a few more pawns forward, also creating some luft for my king. He goes bishop to d8. And now I play bishop to b4. My idea is simple. I'm either going to put my bishop on e1, or I'm going to put my bishop on c3, preparing bishop takes on d4. And so now when he wraps the bishop around to h4, I can play the move bishop to c3, hoping to win on d4. And the reason why this move is really nice is because he really wants to take the pawn with the bishop, which prevents us from trading rooks. But if he takes with the bishop, now I'm going to take with my bishop, and this piece is pinned. And so we're going to end up trading all of the material, and I'll just play like b5, a5, a4, trade off the last pawn, and then push my pawns, as well as on the king side and queen side. So that'll be an easy win. Because of that, my opponent decides to play king to f1, but now he just loses his 6th pawn, and instead of deciding to play on, he resigned here. So hopefully that was a very instructive video. It's pretty simple. If your opponent is playing something wacky, just play the reverse London as black, and when your opponent is getting a little bit too overeager, trying to get the perfect setup, trying not to develop their pieces unless they go to the absolute perfect square, don't be afraid to trade off some of the material, like sacrifice in exchange, win some pawns, and have really nice active pieces. Alright guys, take care. Bye.